You walk into a coffee shop on a Tuesday morning and see him. The guy in the perfectly pressed button down, typing furiously on his MacBook Pro, AirPods in, looking like he just stepped out of a LinkedIn ad for success. His outfit probably cost more than most people's rent. He orders a $12 oat milk cortado without blinking. Everything about him screams financial stability. What you don't see is that he's 3 days away from overdrafting his checking account. His credit cards are maxed out, and he's been eating ramen for dinner because that cortado just ate up his food budget for the week. Welcome to the era of the quietly broke millennial, where looking successful has become more important than actually being successful, and where an entire generation has perfected the art of financial theater. My name is Nick, and I spend way too much time analyzing why an entire generation is drowning in financial quicksand while everyone pretends everything is fine. If you're tired of hearing that avocado toast is the reason you can't afford a house, make sure to subscribe because we're about to dive deep into the real numbers that explain why millennials are more financially screwed than any generation in modern history. Here's something that will absolutely blow your mind. In just 12 months, the percentage of workers feeling financially insecure jumped from 30% to 48%. That's not a gradual decline, that's a financial cliff. We're talking about a 60% increase in financial anxiety in a single year, and this isn't happening in some economic wasteland. This is happening right now in what economists keep telling us is a strong economy. But before we get into the brutal math that explains this phenomenon, let me tell you exactly what you're going to learn in this video. First, I'm going to show you the 3 massive economic shifts that have completely rigged the game against millennials. Then, we'll break down the real numbers that prove this generation isn't financially irresponsible, they're financially trapped. Finally, I'll reveal why even 6-figure earners are living paycheck to paycheck and what that means for the future of the middle class. And here's something most financial experts won't tell you because it doesn't sell their courses or coaching programs. This isn't about personal responsibility or budgeting apps or cutting back on coffee. This is about structural economic changes that have fundamentally altered what it means to build wealth in America. The rules changed, but nobody told millennials they were playing a completely different game. The first thing you need to understand is that we're looking at a generation that followed every piece of advice they were given, only to discover that the economic ladder they were climbing had half its rungs sawed off. These are people who went to college, got degrees, found careers, and still can't afford the basic markers of adulthood that previous generations took for granted. Let's start with housing, because this is where the quiet desperation becomes impossible to ignore. The number of first-time homebuyers has collapsed from over 3 million in 2004 to just over 1 million in 2024. That's not a housing shortage, that's a generational lockout. The median house price is now nearly 6 times the median household income, compared to less than 4 times in 1984. Think about what this means in practical terms. Your parents bought their first home when houses cost 4 times their annual salary. Millennials are trying to buy homes that cost 6 times their annual salary, while also dealing with interest rates, student loans, and an economy that treats steady employment like a luxury item. But here's where it gets really twisted. Once homeownership starts looking impossible, behavior changes completely. When you can't save for a down payment because the goalpost keeps moving further away, why save at all? This explains the so-called doom spending that financial experts love to criticize. It's not financial irresponsibility, it's a rational response to an irrational situation. The psychological research backs this up perfectly. When people lose hope in achieving major financial goals, they shift their spending patterns toward immediate gratification. It's not that millennials don't understand delayed gratification, it's that they've calculated the math and realized that delaying gratification won't actually get them what they want. And speaking of math, that doesn't add up. Let's talk about the student debt crisis that's crushing an entire generation. Nearly 19 million millennials are carrying student loan debt, with an average balance of over $40,000. But the real damage isn't just the monthly payments, it's how that debt delays every other financial milestone. More than half of millennial borrowers have delayed major financial decisions because of student loans. They can't buy homes, they can't buy cars, they can't start businesses, and they can't even think about having kids because they're still paying for the education that was supposed to guarantee their financial success. Nearly 60% say they experience stress and anxiety related to their student debt, and over half say they wouldn't have taken on that much debt if they could do it over again. But here's the really messed up part. This debt was supposed to be an investment in their future earning potential. Instead, it's become a financial anchor that drags down their entire adult life. The education system essentially sold them a product that doesn't deliver what it promised, then stuck them with the bill anyway. The employment landscape has shifted in ways that make traditional financial planning nearly impossible. The gig economy promised flexibility and opportunity, but delivered income instability and benefit insecurity. Nearly 3/4 of younger workers now earn their income through non-salary arrangements. That means hourly wages, contract work, gig platforms, and commission-based pay. This isn't just about job satisfaction or work-life balance. This is about fundamental financial security. When your income fluctuates wildly from month to month, how do you budget for a mortgage payment? When you don't have employer-sponsored health insurance or retirement benefits, how do you plan for the future? When 80% of gig workers struggle with unexpected $1,000 expenses, how do you build an emergency fund? The answer is you don't. You survive month to month and hope nothing goes wrong, which explains why so many millennials feel like they're constantly on the edge of financial disaster, even when they're technically employed. But even millennials who manage to climb the traditional career ladder are discovering that success doesn't mean what it used to mean. 64% of six-figure earners say their income isn't a milestone for success. It's the bare minimum for staying afloat. Think about that for a second. People earning over $100,000 a year are describing themselves as barely getting by. This isn't about lifestyle inflation or keeping up with the Joneses. This is about the basic cost of middle-class life pricing out the middle class. Housing, healthcare, childcare, transportation, and education now cost so much that even high earners are financially anxious. They're living what researchers call the illusion of affluence, where a good salary on paper translates to financial stress in reality. One financial strategist recently argued that the real poverty line should be around $140,000 in household income when you account for the true cost of housing, healthcare, childcare, transportation, and college savings. If that's accurate, then the vast majority of millennials are technically living below what should be considered the poverty line, even if they don't qualify for any assistance programs. This creates a particularly cruel form of financial stress. You're earning too much to qualify for help, but not enough to actually get ahead. You're stuck in this middle ground where you're financially struggling but not officially poor, which means you suffer in silence while everyone assumes you're doing fine. The mental health implications of this economic squeeze are staggering. 40% of younger workers report feeling stressed or anxious all or most of the time, with financial concerns ranking as the top contributing factor. This isn't just about money, this is about hope. When an entire generation realizes that the traditional path to financial security has been blocked off, the psychological impact cascades through every aspect of their lives. Financial stress doesn't stay in its lane. It affects job performance, relationships, health decisions, and long-term planning. When you're constantly worried about money, it becomes harder to make good decisions about money, creating a vicious cycle that's incredibly difficult to break. The quietly broke millennial phenomenon becomes even more absurd when you look at the desperate measures this generation is willing to take just to achieve basic home ownership. 41% of millennials say they're willing to buy a house with asbestos or pest issues. Let that sink in for a moment. An entire generation has been priced out so completely that they're literally volunteering to live with cancer causing materials and roach infestations just to stop throwing money at landlords. 57% are ready to invest in fixer-uppers, which sounds romantic until you realize that most millennials can barely afford the down payment, let alone the tens of thousands needed for renovations. It's like being offered a lottery ticket where the prize is the opportunity to go into even more debt. But it gets weirder. 34% of millennials say they're willing to buy a home near a cemetery. 26% would consider living next to railroad tracks. These aren't lifestyle preferences, these are the housing equivalent of settling for whoever swipes right on your dating profile because you're tired of being alone. The most telling statistic? More millennials are willing to live near a cemetery than near their ex-partner, which honestly makes perfect sense. Dead people are quiet, they don't play loud music, and they never ask to borrow your lawnmower. Meanwhile, your ex will probably still try to use your Netflix password. This willingness to accept substandard housing conditions isn't about being picky or entitled, it's about a generation that's been systematically locked out of homeownership, watching their dreams get smaller and smaller until they're grateful for anything with four walls and a roof that doesn't collapse. The intergenerational wealth gap has created a situation where millennials aren't just competing against each other, they're competing against their parents' generation in an economy that heavily favors people who already own assets. Baby boomers control more than 50% of all wealth in America, despite making up a much smaller portion of the population. That's not just inequality, that's economic hoarding. Here's where the math becomes truly depressing. Boomers are sitting on $82 trillion in wealth. That's more than twice what Generation X has accumulated and 4 times what millennials have managed to scrape together. When you're trying to buy a house and you're bidding against people who can pay cash from their home equity or retirement accounts, you're not competing on a level playing field. The real estate market has become a rigged casino where millennials are playing with food stamps while boomers are throwing around poker chips worth more than most people's annual salaries. Being locked out of homeownership doesn't just delay your plans, it could cost young buyers roughly $150,000 in lost equity over their lifetime. Building wealth through home appreciation is exactly how previous generations accumulated their massive wealth advantages. Today, boomers own an estimated $19 trillion in home equity wealth alone. When you can't access that wealth building mechanism, you're essentially running a race where everyone else got a 30-year head start. The cruel irony is that many millennials are simultaneously trying to build their own wealth while supporting aging parents who didn't save enough for retirement. Meet the sandwich generation that got compressed ahead of schedule. Instead of having decades to establish their financial foundation, millennials are dealing with student loans, housing costs, and family obligations all at once. This reversal of traditional family financial dynamics is creating what researchers call the 401J retirement plan, where the J stands for junior. Parents are increasingly expecting their adult children to serve as their retirement safety net, which would be touching if it weren't financially devastating for everyone involved. The psychological toll of financial insecurity has created a mental health crisis that further compounds the economic struggles. When you're constantly stressed about money, it becomes harder to make good decisions about money. Your brain literally can't function optimally when it's stuck in survival mode, which means financial stress creates more financial stress in an endless feedback loop. Millennials are the therapy generation, but therapy costs money they don't have. The intersection of financial anxiety and mental health treatment creates this perfect storm where the people who most need professional help are the least able to afford it. It's like being prescribed medicine that costs more than your rent. The rising cost of everything from groceries to car insurance has made traditional money-saving strategies less effective or completely obsolete. Buying in bulk requires upfront investment that many millennials can't afford. Energy-efficient appliances cost more initially, even though they save money long-term. Even being frugal now requires capital that broke people don't have. Over a third of younger workers report that their total monthly spending is higher than they expected once they started financially supporting themselves. This isn't about poor budgeting skills. It's about the gap between what financial education teaches and what real life actually costs. Nobody prepared them for the reality that being an adult in America is exponentially more expensive than previous generations experienced. The adaptive strategies millennials are employing reveal just how dire the situation has become. 72% have taken steps to improve their financial health in the past year, but their options are limited to cutting expenses rather than building wealth. 51% are trying to save more, 24% are paying down debt, and 64% are reducing expenses. But here's the problem with the expense reduction strategy. You can only cut so much before you're living in poverty. 41% have cut back on dining out, and 23% are shopping at cheaper grocery stores. These aren't lifestyle choices, these are survival tactics disguised as financial planning. The gig economy has created a particularly insidious form of economic exploitation where workers bear all the risks while companies reap all the benefits. No health insurance, no retirement contributions, no paid time off, no unemployment benefits, and no job security. It's like being an entrepreneur, except someone else owns the business and keeps all the profits. 80% of gig workers struggle with unexpected $1,000 expenses, which means the majority of this workforce is constantly one car repair or medical bill away from financial catastrophe. The feast or famine cycle makes it nearly impossible to plan for anything beyond next month's rent. This employment instability has fundamentally altered how millennials approach major life decisions. When you don't know if you'll have income next month, how do you commit to a 30-year mortgage? When you don't have employer-sponsored health care, how do you plan to have children? When you don't have a retirement plan, how do you envision your future? The answer is you don't plan, you survive. You make short-term decisions based on immediate needs and hope that somehow things will work out in the long run. It's financial planning by wishful thinking, which isn't really planning at all. The quietly broke phenomenon has created a new category of financial struggle that doesn't fit traditional definitions of poverty. These are people who appear successful on paper, but are drowning financially in reality. They have college degrees, professional jobs, and social media feeds that suggest they're thriving, but they're actually one missed paycheck away from serious trouble. This invisible financial crisis is particularly dangerous because it doesn't trigger the social safety nets designed to help people in economic distress. You earn too much to qualify for assistance, but not enough to actually build wealth. You're stuck in this economic purgatory where you're financially struggling but officially fine. The rise of the quietly broke millennial represents a fundamental breakdown in the American economic system. The traditional pathways to financial security have been systematically dismantled while the expectations for individual success have remained unchanged. It's like removing half the rungs from a ladder and then criticizing people for not climbing fast enough. But this isn't just a millennial problem. It's a preview of what's coming for future generations. Generation Z is facing even worse economic conditions with higher education costs, more expensive housing, and less job security. The quietly broke phenomenon isn't an anomaly, it's the new normal. What makes this situation even more infuriating is how the financial advice industry continues to gaslight an entire generation with solutions that worked when dinosaurs roamed the earth. Financial experts are still out here recommending strategies like they're reading from a playbook written in 1975, completely ignoring the fact that the economic game has fundamentally changed. You've got financial gurus telling millennials to save 6 months of expenses for an emergency fund while they're already choosing between groceries and gas money. It's like telling someone who's drowning that they should really consider taking swimming lessons. The advice isn't wrong, it's just completely disconnected from reality. The 3% savings account that your grandparents used to build wealth, that same account is now paying 0.01%, while inflation eats away at your purchasing power like a financial termite infestation. The stock market that previous generations could rely on for steady growth, now it's more volatile than a reality TV show, swinging wildly based on whatever billionaire tweets something controversial at 3 in the morning. Traditional retirement planning has become an exercise in fantasy football. Financial advisors are still telling people to save 15% of their income for retirement, while those same people are spending 40% of their income just on housing. The math doesn't work, but nobody wants to admit that the entire system has broken down. Here's what really happened, and this is the part that should make you absolutely furious. Like, the cost of everything that matters for long-term wealth building has skyrocketed while wages have remained relatively stagnant. But instead of acknowledging this economic reality, society has decided to blame millennials for not being financially responsible enough. It's the perfect crime, really. Jack up the prices of housing, education, and healthcare to levels that are mathematically impossible for most people to afford, then criticize those people for not being able to afford them. It's like charging $100 for a hamburger and then writing articles about how young people are too entitled to appreciate fine dining. The quietly broke millennial isn't just struggling with current expenses, they're also dealing with the complete collapse of future financial security. Social Security is projected to run out of money right around the time millennials are supposed to retire, which is convenient timing for a generation that already can't afford to save for retirement anyway. So there you have it. The rise of the quietly broke millennial isn't a personal failure. It's a systemic breakdown disguised as individual responsibility. The economic rules changed without warning, and an entire generation is paying the price while being told it's their own fault. If you found this eye-opening, make sure to hit that subscribe button and check out my video on why even high earners are living paycheck to paycheck, because this rabbit hole goes deeper than you think.